Shalom, welcome. It's great to have you with us. We're actually we're still waiting on some of our special guests. Avatal Mazar and 2 or 3 of Dr. Mazar's boys are going to be joining us today. They're caught in traffic, so they're going to be a little bit late. So we're going to change up the order here just a little bit. So I'll come up after the next speaker and make a few remarks there where we just want to recognize Avatal and Dr. Mazar's boys. Right now, it's my privilege to introduce one of Dr. Alat Mazar's colleagues. He's a pragmatic and thoughtful and visionary archaeologist. He's someone that we've really come to respect and admire. In addition to being a great scientist, he really is an outstanding teacher. And I've been told by our students that he's a terrific boss. Our students excavated with him all summer, and they all told me just how much they enjoyed and appreciated his leadership, and they can't wait to start digging again. So it's my pleasure to introduce the head of the Institute of Archaeology at Hebrew University and the lead archaeologist on the 2022 Ophel excavation, Professor Uzi Leibner.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I'm a bit blushing, but okay, so good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the staff of the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology for inviting me to talk here this afternoon. Second, I would like to thank Mr. Flurry and the Armstrong College for the continual support of the Hebrew University's excavations in Jerusalem, headed by the late Eilat Mazar, and for funding and bringing volunteers for the renewed excavations that took place this summer. Especially, I would like to thank Brent Naktagal, can't see him here, right back there, and Chris Eames, who showed me the interesting remains that Eilat uncovered and influenced me to take this project. Finally, as a representative of one of the senior archaeological institutions in Jerusalem, I'm happy to congratulate the newly established institution and wish it will grow and take part in important and fruitful archaeological activities. In my presentation, I will start from the overall picture and then zoom into the current project, its results, and future research questions and goals. The Ophel is one of the most important archaeological sites in Israel. Indeed, one of the largest excavations ever carried out in the country was conducted here between 1968 and 1978 by Benjamin Mazar, uncovering nearly 30,000 square meters and remains from various periods. Of special significance and splendor are the remains from the Second Temple period, mainly the gigantic walls of the Herodian temple compound itself and adjacent structures, such as the Robinson Arch, the staircase leading up to the Hulda gates, and so on. During most of the First and Second Temple periods, Jerusalem was situated on the southeastern hill known as the City of David. Okay, that's the lower part. I see the laser is not that, sorry. The lower part of the hill down there. The Ophel is located on the ridge connecting the city on the south and the Temple Mount on the north, meaning it was the major route leading up from the city up to the temple. During the late Second Temple period, Jerusalem expanded significantly to the north and the west, and most of its population did not reside anymore south of the Temple Mount. Okay, so you see on the right the ridge of the City of David, and then you see Jerusalem as it expanded, and most of the neighborhoods are not concentrated anymore at the south. Nevertheless, there are good reasons to believe the main entrances were still located on the south, and most of the visitors to the temple probably reached through the Ophel. And now I'll try to explain why I think so. First, the archaeological remains adjacent to the Herodian temple from the south point to a plan that is meant to serve large crowds of visitors. A wide street runs all along the southern wall. 2 gates, known as the Hulda gates, are fixed in this wall, located some 70 meters apart. And Yuval Baruch, who's sitting here, excavated near one of them. These gates led to tunnels that ran under the royal basilica. Okay, you see the Hulda gates and tunnels running under the royal basilica and exited in the court on the Temple Mount. 2 vast staircases climb from the south up to these gates. The eastern one about 15 meters wide, the western one about 65 meters wide of a staircase, paved in alternating narrow and wide stairs, all pointing to the need to manage extensive traffic here. To this, we should add the many public ritual baths uncovered at the Ophel, as well as the colossal water reservoirs located here, likely built for the use of pilgrims to the temple. Second point, various archaeological discoveries from the last decades seem to indicate that many of the pilgrims coming from outside the city during this period tended to enter the city from the southern gate and climb up from the city of David through the Ophel Hill to the Temple Mount. Outside the southeastern part of the city were found concentrations of numerous intact pottery vessels. Scholars have suggested these belonged to pilgrims who lodged in tent camps outside the city in this area. Right within the southern gate of the city, at the edge of the city of David, was uncovered the Siloam, or the Shiloach pool, a huge stepped pool which was apparently used by pilgrims for drinking or for immersing, and you can see that on the bottom right. From there, a 600-meter long stepped street climbs through the Tyropean Valley towards the temple in the north, and all these were uncovered in the past few decades. It is paved, the street, with large, well-cut stones in the pattern of 2 steps followed by a long landing, giving the walkers a sense of some sort of a procession climbing up the street. Truly, this street leads towards the Robinson Arch at the southwestern corner of the temple. However, that gate apparently led to the royal basilica and was probably not used as the main entrance for the crowds. For these, the Hulda gates, which led straight to the court of the temple compound, were more suitable. Perhaps a parallel street from the south climbed along the ridge of the city of David, leading straight to the Hulda gates, but up to now, we don't have any remains of this. In any case, it makes sense topographically. Until this day, the main street climbing from the south runs here on the ridge, and you can see here an aerial view from 1968. You can see the main street climbing along near the ridge of the city of David, straight towards the area of the Hulda gates. Third point, the description of the temple in the Mishnah. Although written after the destruction of the temple, and perhaps also a text somewhat idealized, it also gives the impression that the Hulda gates were the main portals to the temple. The Mishnah also describes a few times pilgrims climbing from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount, something that can be done only from the south, since the other areas of the city were all higher than the temple. Finally, scholars have pointed to the symbolic and ceremonial aspect of climbing up to the temple. This is common in many cultures, and in Second Temple period Jerusalem may have also preserved a sense of the ancestral way of biblical pilgrimage, which was from the south. Indeed, the Hebrew term used in the ancient sources for pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple is aliyah laregel, literally climbing up to the festival so it keeps a sense of the topography, maybe the direction of approach. Zooming into the Ophel, unfortunately, except for the remains abutting the Temple Mount walls, we know very little about the plan of this area during the Second Temple period. Besides the fragments of architectural decorations published by Orit Peleg Barkat and a forthcoming volume on the Robinson Arch prepared by Eilat Mazar, none of the remains of this period from Benjamin Mazar's excavations were ever published. Preliminary reports that appeared during that dig, as well as popular books published ever since, describe the Ophel as a public area, but with a lack of plans and presentations of the structures and the finds, little can be said on the actual reality of this area during that period. Were there streets leading up to their staircases near the gates? How were they organized? Were they paved? Were there public squares like elsewhere in the city, public buildings, shops, residential structures? We simply don't know for sure. Narrowing our focus to the eastern part of the Ophel, Benjamin Mazar's excavations here revealed a Byzantine neighborhood that covered the entire area, and this was published by Eilat Mazar some 15 years ago. It is comprised of crowded domestic structures built on terraces. Although the natural slope of the hill here climbs from southeast to northwest, the gigantic southern wall of the Herodian Temple Mount clearly dictated the orientation of this neighborhood to the cardinal directions. It was also crisscrossed by a net of north-south and east-west alleys. The neighborhood developed in the early Byzantine period and flourished in the 5th and 6th centuries CE. In most places here, Mazar's excavations did not descend below the Byzantine floor levels, and we know very little about the early history of this area. During conservation and gardening works carried in the 1980s after that dig, a large stepped pool was uncovered by Meir Ben-Dov some 50 meters south of the eastern Hulda Gate. Ben-Dov heavily covered it with modern gray plaster, but never published the discovery or anything related to it. Plans of this pool were published by Roni Reich and later by Eilat Mazar, and both assumed it should be dated to the Second Temple period. Two similar pools are known from elsewhere in Jerusalem and indeed date to the Second Temple period. However, without information on its excavation or any associated datable finds, we cannot say anything clear about its actual date, development phases, or relation to the surrounding structures. A decade ago, Eilat started excavating here and dismantled the eastern edge of a Byzantine house adjacent to the pool from the northwest. Beneath was discovered a beautiful facade in which two large and adjacent thresholds were fixed. A system of tunnels running beneath this area was also surveyed. The discovery was published in the second volume of the Ophel excavations, where Eilat suggested that the thresholds led to rooms associated with a pool. She assigned it to the Herodian period on the basis of finds on the floor. The last excavation season Eilat conducted at the Ophel was in 2018 and focused on other areas. However, a small inspection here carried out by Amir Cohen Clonimus, which is somewhere here in the crowd, revealed the beginning of a well-preserved staircase descending from the northern threshold inwards. Moving to the renewed excavations conducted this summer, the goal was to examine the preservation of the monumental structure and to try and shed light on its nature and purpose. We concentrated, therefore, on this area alone, with Amir supervising the excavation of the structure itself and Chris Eames supervising the excavation of the subterranean system beneath the building. The small working team included some 10 students, mostly from the Armstrong College, with a few archaeology students from the Hebrew University. The work was truly painstaking. In order to reach the Herodian layer, we had to dismantle part of the Byzantine structure which lay high above and descend through massive fills beneath the floors. Deep below was discovered a dramatic destruction layer of the early structure, and we will return to this destruction shortly. A 3-meter wide portico paved with neat ashlars was exposed in front of the structure, connecting it to the large stepped pool. Inside the structure were discovered 2 rooms with staircases descending inwards, and between them a wall with a water channel on top, perhaps a water channel meant to feed the large stepped pool. The southern room had plastered stairs of the type common in ritual baths, and the lower stairs are narrow, also typical of ritual baths. Only future excavations will enable to conclude the function of this room, but it may indeed have been a large ritual bath. Of the other room, only a small portion was uncovered. This is the northern room. This is due to the massive Byzantine walls that buried it. Its beautiful architecture is outstanding. A 2.4-meter wide threshold for a double-winged door leads to a staircase built of ashlars resembling the Herodian street we just talked about. On the stairs of both rooms was a massive destruction layer containing ashlars of the early structure and numerous pottery vessels, stone vessels characteristic of purity observance of the Second Temple period, glass vessels, and dozens of coins, the latest of which are coins of the year 4 of the Great Jewish Revolt, the year 70 CE. And later in the evening, you can see some of the coins are on display in the room. Not least interesting were the subterranean discoveries. Work here was even more painstaking, and a lot of it had to be done while crawling. The tunnels are connected to the drainage of the large stepped pool and are plastered, hence were clearly meant to hold water. Part of the system clearly predates the monumental structure built above, such as a barrel-vaulted reservoir that was canceled when a massive pier supporting the superstructure was built inside it. Other parts were clearly built with the superstructure, such as a wall built on bedrock for supporting the monumental facade. It was built with an arch in the middle to enable passage through the tunnels, and that's what you see on the left-hand side pictures. Coins found in the plastered walls and floor will enable us to determine the date of the construction of this underground system. The subterranean area was also used during the Byzantine period as evidence from the finds. Of special interest is a bone plaque, probably a cover of a jewelry box, with a carving of Dionysus or Satyr, which was found in here. Moving to the overall picture, the rich finds from the excavation, including hundreds of identifiable pottery vessels, dozens of stone vessels, oil lamps, glass vessels, and 160 ancient coins, point to 2 distinct layers in both the superstructure and the tunnels. The lower layer from the late Second Temple period up to its dramatic destruction in the year 70 CE, and after a gap of some 300 years, the area was rebuilt in the Byzantine period in the 5th and 6th centuries. The structures of these 2 periods were built also in clearly different orientations. The Herodian structure was built on a southeast-northwest axis, while the Byzantine structure is built on an east-west axis. What can we say now about the nature and history of the Herodian structure? Its monumental architecture and large entranceways clearly indicate it was a public building. Since one doorway is small and the other is large, we may hypothesize There was another small doorway on the other side, as common in the design of public facades of this period. Usually they have one large central entranceway and then flanked on both sides with smaller ones. The architectural plan clearly indicates that the structure, the portico, and the large stepped pool were all built as one integral complex. They are built on the same axis with a sophisticated subterranean water system connecting them, apparently filling the pool from the channel coming from within the building and then running beneath the building in different directions. Furthermore, the plan of the staircase leading into the structure on the one hand and the staircase leading into the stepped pool on the other seem to mirror each other, with sets of stairs intervened by landings, again pointing to some sort of a integral architectural plan. The current length of the exposed part of the complex is about 20 meters, and it clearly continues to the northwest beneath the Byzantine structure. This is substantial, this size. The prime location of this complex, near the foot of the staircase, climbing up to the eastern Khulda gate, indicates it was probably of significance. But what was its purpose? I'm afraid that before we uncover the rest of the building, we cannot say anything for sure. Based on what was uncovered meanwhile, we may speculate it was a complex devoted to ritual purity. The large stepped pool was most likely used as a ritual bath of some sort, and it seems that the southern room inside the structure was also used for this purpose, this kind of purpose. We cannot determine yet if the complex had different phases, nor can we date its construction yet, but it's pretty clear that its destruction was in the summer of the year 70 CE, together with the destruction of the temple and the entire city. We also do not know yet how this complex was integrated into the urban plan of the Ophel, and where were the access routes that led to it. These questions will have to wait to further seasons with wider exposure of the Second Temple period layer in order to receive answers. Managing an excavation is comparable to orchestral conducting. The intensive collaboration with staff members, volunteers, state authorities, contractors, conservators, etc., makes this mission complicating, exhausting. I won't say what I wanted to say further on. I was fortunate to have wonderful team members and volunteers who made this into a fascinating and enjoyable season, each contributing his or her part to bring this collaborative mission to completion. I wish to thank them all, and I'm looking forward to the future seasons at the Ophel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Leibner. Well, we're very delighted that you could all join us on this special and historic occasion, the official opening of the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. We want to extend an especially warm welcome to Professor Amichai Mazar and to Avital Mazar and her husband, and I think Ophir is here as well, one of Dr. Alat Mazar's sons. It's great to have you with us. We're very grateful for all of the support and encouragement that you've provided. As we establish this library and institute, you've probably noticed that we're surrounded by books. This is the personal library of the late Dr. Alat Mazar and Professor Benjamin Mazar. We inherited this library from Dr. Mazar following her death last year. It's just amazing to think that this library, all of these books, educated and influenced the minds of two of Israel's most successful archaeologists. We're very excited to have these books, and we're looking forward to sharing them with whomever might want to come in and use the library. I did just want to say a special thank you to Avital. This really wouldn't have been possible without you. She's worked very hard on processing her sister's work, and she's doing just a wonderful job taking care of all of Alat's work, and we're going to continue to support you as much as we can, Avatal. I'm just going to make a few remarks here and then introduce our final speaker for today. When the speaking portion is over, we invite you to partake of some refreshments outside, some drinks and snacks, and we'll clear out a little bit of this furniture, and you'll be able to take a walk through the library too. Establishing and operating a scientific institute like this is not an easy or small task. I remember the moment Mr. Flurry, our founder, first shared his idea to establish an archaeology institute. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago now. The thought of starting an archaeology institute in Jerusalem was thrilling. We discussed the idea with Alat. I had a conversation even about it with the late Herschel Shanks. Everybody was supportive and excited, but still it was an ambitious undertaking and a little overwhelming. But the way to accomplish ambitious tasks is to just put your head down and start working, and that's what we did in 2014. Brent Nuktagal and his wife moved over here, and Brent started researching and writing for us. He was very productive. In fact, he was so productive, he had 3 children in Israel. And then last year, we moved over Christopher Eames to live and work here in Jerusalem. He too has been productive. He's also had a child while in Jerusalem. We have more children in Jerusalem than actual employees, which is fantastic. And here in recent years, we've expanded our work beyond just archaeology. We've created ArmstrongInstitute.org. This is a website that showcases Israel's biblical archaeology. We've created and hosted 2 archaeological exhibits at our performing arts building back in America. That was very exciting. Brent has launched a biblical archaeology podcast, which you can find on YouTube. And we've also begun publishing a bi-monthly full-color print magazine, which goes by the name of Let the Stones Speak. So opening this new building and library is a wonderful moment and a high point for us, but it's certainly not the apex of our work in Jerusalem. This building is a tool, and it's one that we hope will allow us to expand our projects in Israel and to maybe initiate future projects in Israel. We are, as they say, just getting started, and we hope that the best is yet to come. We're humbled by what we've been given here in Israel, and we recognize that it really wouldn't have been possible without the generous support of various individuals and organizations here in Jerusalem. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to express our gratitude to some of those. First, we're very grateful to David Beery and his staff at the City of David. I think we have Zev here with us today. We have many fond memories excavating in the City of David with Alat. We were by her side when she discovered some really remarkable finds in the City of David. Nehemiah's wall, the seals of Yehiel and Gedaliah, the Judean princes responsible for imprisoning the prophet Jeremiah, and of course exposing the large stone structure, the palace of King David. So we're very thankful to the City of David for their support and collaboration, and we look forward to working with them on future excavations and projects. We're also very grateful to the Israel Antiquities Authority and the many wonderful people that we've worked with over the years at the IAA, Helena and Allegra, and there's all kinds of people at the IAA that have been very supportive of what we've been doing here in Jerusalem. More recently, it's been a real pleasure to get to know Amit Rahim, and we've appreciated his support and encouragement. We're looking forward to working more with him. We're also very grateful to Hebrew University. Our relationship with Hebrew University is long and rich. In fact, it extends back more than 50 years to December 1968. That's when Hebrew University formed a partnership with our predecessor, the late Herbert Armstrong, and Ambassador College. We have some photos of our history here in Jerusalem and with Hebrew University on the walls in the lobby. And my favorite photo is a photo of Mr. Armstrong with the late Joseph Avraham, and I think it's Prime Minister Zalman Shazar. And it's actually a photo of that December 1968 meeting where that partnership was formed. So we're very grateful to Hebrew University and all of their support. More recently, we've begun to work with Professor Josef Garfinkel and Professor Uzi Leibner, both highly esteemed Hebrew University archaeologists. Our friendship with these men is relatively new, but we're really enjoying it, and it's already, as Professor Leibner explained, it's already been quite fruitful. And we're excited to work with Professor Leibner and Professor Garfinkel more in the future. Finally, it's just, I think it's appropriate on this occasion to just remember Dr. Alat Mazar and her grandfather, Professor Benjamin Mazar, and the whole Mazar family, really, including Professor Amahai Mazar, who's here with us today. This really is the royal family of biblical archaeology. Professor Benjamin Mazar was often referred to as the dean of biblical archaeology, and rightly so, I think. Professor Mazar and his granddaughter and his nephew are responsible for some of the greatest and most important excavations and archaeological discoveries in Israel. The fingerprints of the Mazar family are just all over excavations and ancient ruins across this great nation. We consider it a great blessing and privilege to have participated in the discovery of some really astonishing finds, the large stone structure, King David's palace, the monumental walls of King Solomon there in the Ophel, the Hezekiah bulla, the Isaiah bulla, the bullae of the Judean princes, the wall of Nehemiah, the 70 AD destruction coins, the golden menorah. It was just a real honor and really exciting for us to be with Alat on those excavations. So the Armstrong Institute is here today in this beautiful building, nestled among these books, engaged in the important work of biblical archaeology because of Benjamin and Alat Mazar. These two great archaeologists were our mentors and counselors. They were our teachers, and in many ways, they were our family. And one of the goals of this institute is to continue the work and the legacy of Dr. Alat Mazar and her grandfather. So to all these individuals and organizations, and to those of you that have joined us today, we do just want to say a big thank you. We couldn't have done this without your support. And at this time, I'll go ahead now and introduce our keynote speaker for today. This man is the chancellor of Herbert W. Armstrong College. He's a longtime student of the Bible and biblical history. He's authored more than 50 books on biblical figures and biblical history. This institute is named after Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, a prominent 20th century humanitarian, educator, and minister, and he was a very warm friend to Israel and its archaeology. When Mr. Armstrong died in 1986, this next speaker picked up Mr. Armstrong's mantle, and today he continues the work and the legacy of Mr. Armstrong here in Israel. The keynote address this afternoon will be delivered by the founder of the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, Mr. Gerald Flurry.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. This is certainly a very special day for us here, and we're just happy to have all of you with us. I wanted to take just a little different angle than the other speakers to tell you a little bit about our history with not only the history of Mr. Armstrong, but the Israeli leaders as well. In that one decade, he met all of the leaders of Israel, as far as I can tell, and he, of course, was the founder of Armstrong College. And it all began with Dr. Benjamin Mazar launching this most significant excavation ever in Jerusalem. And so that's something that's very impressive. And then December 1968, the universities of, or the University of Hebrew University and the Antiquities Authority and Mr. Armstrong made a 50-50 financial deal and began this magnificent excavation that still astonishes a lot of people. Dr. Mazar had been president of Hebrew University for 8 years, 1953 to 1966. Now, in this, as we've got into this, we find there's quite a lot of controversy in archaeology, as there is other professions. But I want to show you something that I think is really rare, and that is the relationship with the Israeli leaders and Herbert W. Armstrong. I think it's a history that I studied into more deeply, and it's a history that really, I think, is worth remembering and has some tremendous lessons for us. And of course, we all have different ideas about that, but still, in this sense, it is our history, any way you look at it. So I want to discuss the relationship between the Israeli leaders and Mr. Armstrong. I'm just going to quickly go through some slides here, and I won't take up much time for this, but we can begin with the first one. Is that I can't see it from here, I guess.
That's Professor Benjamin Mazar.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, anyhow, this is where it all began, and you can see Dr. Mazar and Mr. Armstrong talking together. And then the second one, this is the Dr. Mazar presenting Mr. Armstrong an honorary dinner. They had an honorary dinner by the Japanese ambassador to Israel in 1974. The two men enjoyed a close friendship for many years. Then number 3, number 6, I guess, in your numbers up back there. But this is Mayor Teddy Kollek, arm in arm, a Jewish custom among close friends. And then Prime Minister Golda Meir, Mr. Armstrong gave her a beautiful Steuben crystal there in the Knesset office. And he had this to say about her, and I wanted to mention this. He said, "Without apology to anyone, I have to attribute to this so common, yet so uncommon, a woman, humanly, the quality of greatness such as possessed by so very few." And then he said emphatically, "That is not flattery. I never flatter." And that's the way he felt about that great leader. And this next one is Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I'll say a little bit more about him later. And then this last one is Menachem Begin hugging Mr. Armstrong. And he, on that occasion, had returned from a meeting in Tel Aviv. And he stopped in the meeting and left when he heard that Mr. Armstrong was in town. And he went up there to meet him, and they gave him this big bear hug. And then Mr. Armstrong said, "Well, you shouldn't have left your meeting coming just to meet me." And he said, "Well, Mr. Armstrong, I would get up at 2 a.m. in the morning to meet you." So here we have an interesting history to me, and the more I studied into this particular subject and tried to clarify it as much as I could in my own mind, Mr. Armstrong visited Jerusalem 50 times in 4 years, to give you an idea of how much he loved Jerusalem. And I think all of the Israeli leaders also that he worked with loved Jerusalem. And that's why I think they had an unusual harmony. And in looking into it, I began to try to study their conversations between themselves mainly. This was not going to the public, not at least at that time. And I think you'll find it surprising what they said to each other and what they talked about. Now, I find that very interesting, and I hope the rest of you will. But anyhow, it's something that I think many people should know, and I think there's almost nobody that really understands this and really has put these issues together. So when Mr. Armstrong was here, he did refer to the Bible. He never did refer to any Bible but the Hebrew Bible. And these discussions began, let's say, just among these leaders. But then in 1974, somebody made it public, and that was Dr. Mazar. He wanted to know people to know what they were talking about, what they believed, and they shared a certain faith that I think can be very helpful, especially in an age like this. But here's what Mr. Armstrong said. He said, Ambassador College has just been given the great honor and responsibility to be a part of this archaeology planning here in Israel. And he says, not only a great honor, it is a great honor, it's a great honor to us to be a part of this. And it is, in our minds, a spectacular archaeology project that we've been involved with. Now, Mr. Armstrong went on to talk about this responsibility, and I think in one sense, this great honor and responsibility, especially the responsibility, has a lot to do with this institution today. I think a big part of it is this institute, because we felt like we do have a responsibility to try to sustain biblical archaeology. And it really, in some ways, is not as nearly as successful as it should be, the way we look at it. So I want to give you just some quotes, quite a few quotes today, from these men, and they were really just mostly, as I said, among themselves at this time, and then see what you think about what they said. Now, I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm just trying to tell you some history. This is our history and the history of many others around here and around here today. Mr. Teddy Collick presented Mr. Armstrong with a silver and gold sculpture of David defeating Goliath. And he said to Mr. Armstrong, all your life you have been a fighter of giant untruths. And he said, and as you regard yourself a descendant of David, and rightly so, so here in the city of David, we would like to present you with this symbolic sculpture. And here's what Mr. Armstrong replied. He said that Jerusalem was destined to become the greatest city in the world. And in fact, in the whole universe, this city is someday going to be the capital of the universe, because this city is going to exist forever. Now, again, I'm just letting you see what they were discussing. This was not public at all at that time, but that's a strong statement to make. And what it kind of amazes me is in talking about this is that you find a lot of agreement, or at least no negative reactions to what Mr. Armstrong said. These men really were in a fascinating harmony, I thought, because you don't usually take a group like that and put them together and have them be so, let's say, in sync, I guess I can say, with each other, as these men were. Here's a Prime Minister Perez, who said, talking about the King of Jordan, well, he really does want peace, but he has internal problems, and they were discussing that, and Mr. Armstrong said to him, this is the Prime Minister, Perez. Mr. Armstrong responded that although more troubles were coming, world peace would ultimately come, but it isn't going to come easy. Now Mr. Armstrong is making these comments to the top leaders in Israel. And then we'll see as we go along that they really do love each other and have a certain faith in what they're talking about. In November 1974, the banquet there in Tel Aviv, this was an honor to Mr. Armstrong, and this was, at last, it was going public. But why did it go public? And that is fascinating as well. Why would, well, it was Dr. Mazar, Benjamin Mazar, he wanted this released, and they had officials there, parliamentarians, ambassadors, diplomats, and national journalists. Excuse me. And they heard from Dr. Mazar, and here's what he told them. Now, this is what he said, and he was not in any way motivated by Mr. Armstrong to do this. This is what Dr. Mazar said. But he says, and he even used a scripture, just paraphrases it, but primarily he has a firm faithfulness, as I think these leaders did. In the prophecy of Isaiah, paraphrasing Isaiah 2, verses 2 and 3. And here's what it said. I'll just paraphrase it. And it shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and be exalted above the hills. And then it goes on to say, all nations shall flow into it. All nations. That's in, I think, the Bible most of you have. And think about this, what he's saying. This is what Mr. Armstrong talked about, and he's paraphrasing it, and somehow he wants to make this public. Now that you'll have to read your own issues into that, but he goes on to say, many people shall go up and come, let us go up to the mountain of the eternal, and then it says, and he will teach us of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the eternal from Jerusalem. Now this is, again, Mr. Armstrong and these men were thinking beyond, let's say, just biblical archaeology, but they were believing certain prophecies, and this is not a unique prophecy in your Bible. You'll find it there probably about 20 times, the same prophecy in many ways. But here, there are all these nations, it says, are coming to be taught at Jerusalem. And that's going to bring peace to this world. Now, that's in Isaiah, and I think you're all probably familiar with that. And he said Mr. Armstrong has a certain faithfulness. But they did too. They did too. But I think you can imagine, let's just say if somebody believes Isaiah 2 and verses 2 and 3, they're going to be motivated, I think, to have a certain hope in their lives. And I bring that out because this is our history, and these men, I believe, had a special hope in their lives because here Dr. Mazar is trying to get this out to everybody, and I'm not saying anybody should believe anything. I'm just saying this is a part of the Bible that a lot of people believe and are happy to hear something like that, I think. But the key part of this, I thought, was here is Mr. Armstrong, taking all of this archaeology and connecting it to Isaiah 2, verses 2 and 3. Obviously, he was interested in more than just biblical archaeology, but he did not take this to the public himself. Dr. Mazar did. Why did he do that? Well, maybe you and I will have to answer that individually, but he did get it out there, and he did think in his own mind, along with certainly some of those other leaders, quite a few of them I would think, they wanted this message to get out to the people of Israel. It is, after all, taken from the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. But he goes on to say in this public statement, he said, Mr. Armstrong loves and admires Jerusalem, and wholeheartedly he believes in the future of Israel and the holy city. And for him, Jerusalem, the unified Jerusalem, is not only the metropolis of Israel and the spiritual center of monotheistic religions, but also the symbol of a great past and the hope of a better future of mankind. Now, that I found that moving, because you see the problems in the world that I see. We all see them. But you don't see, in my mind, a lot of hope. And what are we going to do without hope? I don't think we're going to be doing maybe the positive things we should. Somewhere we do need to find hope. And I think most of these men, these leaders of Israel, at that time believed what Mr. Armstrong was saying, and they were reacting to it in a very positive way, and most of the time. But again, I don't know every detail of this, but to me, they looked upon Jerusalem as being a city of hope. Now, that is something that I thought was interesting, because it is a part of the history, and some of it even I didn't understand myself, but it's all there, and it's and if you put it all together, well, I feel like if people didn't have that, let's say, know all of the history, they might begin to think, when they only had a tiny portion of the information, they might tend to misinterpret it. So I think it can be certainly a help to certain people, and I think it's good for all of us to think about. But you will have to decide that yourself, of course. And then he concludes, I think we're getting close to the conclusion here. He says, the favor we were given, no, this is from Herbert Armstrong. I wanted you to get his take on this, how unusual it was that they were so much in harmony here. How could it happen that they were so together and believed many things, many similar truths as we look at it? But he says, Mr. Armstrong said this: the favor we were given in their eyes, the warmth of their attitude toward us, was inspiring, astonishing, and most unusual. And I think it is. It's an unusual example, and I think it is maybe getting more unusual. But that's the kind, something, they did know something about world peace. And I'll just conclude by talking briefly about what Mr. Armstrong did. He was called the ambassador for world peace by these people. And he was called that because he met over 30 leaders of the world and not one of them did he approach to visit with them. But they were leaders that wanted to know, to speak to somebody who they believed understood something about world peace, how to have it, and how we'll never have it until, well, no matter how much we reject it according to the Hebrew Bible, well, you're going to have peace. We're going to have world peace. And I don't think that's something that's bad. But here is what this brochure, I got this from February 4th, 1975, bulletin, and it said this brochure is to present in a pictorial fashion the activities of Mr. Armstrong throughout the world during the past 7 years as an ambassador for world peace, a term that people such as Prince Mikasa of Japan, Ambassador Ron of Israel, Minister Cole of Israel, Dr. Singh of the International Court, and others have used publicly to describe the work of Herbert W. Armstrong. Now, that work started almost exactly the time of this great archaeology project we're talking about. And the Israelis, even that, believed there really was a real message coming from this unofficial ambassador for world peace, and that name was given to him by other people, not himself. They just include, that is, these ministers, or excuse me, these leaders, Margaret Thatcher, just to name a few, Deng Xiaoping, Anwar Sadat, Hosni Mubarak, and many, many others. But Mr. Armstrong would go to those people that these leaders really desperately saw that we need world peace. I mean, we can look around. I see this world and I see a need for world peace. Somebody is surely going to speak out and, well, maybe talk about Isaiah 2, verses 2 and 3. That is a strong statement, and there's strong prophecies like that. And here's what these men said in the end toward Mr. Armstrong. This is from Yitzhak Rabin. He says, "But of course I know a great deal about you," talking about Mr. Armstrong, "and we all do deeply appreciate your interest in Israel." He had a great interest in Israel, and just boldly said one time that his next 1,000 years he's going to be living here in Jerusalem. Well, that's the kind of faith he had, and these men are praising him for that, and I think had similar ideas. But he said, during the 45-minute meeting, the two leaders discussed Mr. Armstrong's friendship with Arab chiefs of state and peace among nations. And Prime Minister Rabin thanked Mr. Armstrong for bringing other nations closer to Israel, especially the Arab nations. And you remember the story of Anwar Sadat and all of that. I think all of you are familiar with that. But he says, you brought those people closer to us. This is a prime minister saying that. This is one of your leaders. It's not somebody that's just doesn't know what he's talking about. And so he also said, after he said these words, Mr. Armstrong said this: he was very appreciative of my efforts toward world peace. And I think that's certainly a noble cause, and I think those Israeli leaders were trying very hard to have peace. And you ask Mrs. Mayer about what do you need most of all? And she said, what we need most of all is peace. What can we do if we don't have peace? We're going to be tearing things apart and tearing each other apart. Somehow we have to learn to have peace and have hope. And the Hebrew Bible is just full of statements about that, as I think most of you know. But anyhow, just in conclusion, regardless of our archaeology views, I believe these leaders can teach us some lessons. I think we need to be aware of it. After all, it's a part of my history, and I wanted to make sure I understood it the best I could, and I've tried to relay that to you here today. And I think after all, people can push that aside or whatever they want to do, but still, it is a part of our history, and I think it's worthwhile talking about from time to time. It's been very nice talking to you today.
Thank you.